Hello, my sister friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Grace-Filled Leader Podcast. I'm so excited for you to hear today's show. We have a very, very special guest with us, Beatriz Vargas, the host of the Grace-Fueled Wife Podcast, is with us. Just to share a little bit about Beatriz, 11 years ago, Beatriz came home from a business trip to an empty apartment after her husband had walked out on her. Devastated and determined, Beatriz went on a journey to understand what went wrong in her marriage and to figure out what was in her power to fix. Through that journey and her fierce faith, Beatriz reunited with her husband, where they now enjoy a deeply connected marriage and a joyful life with their 2 children in New York City. Today, Beatriz is helping thousands of women do the same, hopefully before they come home to an empty apartment. She is a globally recognized Christian marriage coach, an international speaker, and host of Grace-Fueled Wife Podcast, which is ranked in the top 1.5% globally. She has a BS in Business Management, a certification in Prepare-Enrich, and will soon have a master's in Marriage and Family Therapy. With 15 plus years of experience coaching families across the globe, she helps Christian wives overcome miscommunication to experience greater connection in marriage by implementing her grace-fueled marriage method. So without further ado, let's get into part 1 of my conversation with Beatriz. Welcome to the Grace-Filled Leader Podcast. Do you want better work-life balance? Do you get stuck in patterns of perfectionism and people-pleasing? Have you always been an overachiever but never really feel good enough, no matter how much outward success you achieve? Do you want more time for the things that matter most? Hi, I'm Tanya, a wife, mom, leader, certified Christian life coach, and Jesus lover. For most of my life, I tried to find worthiness through achievement. But no matter how hard I worked or how much I achieved, I never felt like I was enough. I was left burned out, empty, and exhausted. I had no time or energy for myself or my family. I needed balance. I needed peace. My life changed when I finally started to live like an unconditionally loved daughter of the King, saved by grace. This faith-led podcast will teach you time management, self-care routines, and practical leadership strategies to help you navigate life and leadership. If you're ready to become fueled by grace and free from people-pleasing, if you're ready to multiply your time and impact as a Christian woman in leadership, this podcast is for you. Unbutton your blazers and roll up your sleeves, sister friends. It's time to get after it. Beatriz, welcome to the Grace-Filled Leader Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Tanya, for having me.
For our listeners that aren't maybe familiar with you, can you tell them a little bit about who you are and who you serve?
Yes, sure. So my name is Beatriz Vargas. I am the host of the Grace-Fueled Wife Podcast. I am a wife and a mom of 2, and also a full-time student for marriage and family therapy. So I've got like all the things going on. But through my podcast, The Grace-Fueled Wife, I help Christian women who are struggling in their marriages. Basically, I'd like to say I help them stop fighting with their husbands and communicate clearly, because a lot of what goes wrong in our marriages is communication. But in my personal marriage story, my husband and I were separated for about 9 months. And at the time, I had no resources for me. I had nowhere to go, right? This was, maybe it was 10 years ago. Podcasts were just starting to come out. There was maybe a few books. So it was basically me, my Bible, and like 3 books. And it was like, how am I going to fight for my marriage? How am I going to try to save my marriage when my husband's not interested? He's out the door. He's left me. And here I am by myself. And it wasn't any sort of abusive situation or infidelity, anything like that. It was more, he was desperately crying for help in terms of what was going wrong in our marriage. And then
Mhm.
everybody around me was like, oh, well, what's wrong with him? He's stupid. He's this, he's that. How could he leave you? Right. So where does that leave the woman who's trying to fight for her marriage? I felt like I had no support and no one to talk to and no one to just like walk that path, who wasn't going to judge my husband, who wasn't going to judge me, and who's going to really help me through. So many years and God moments later, here I am, and I've tried to become that woman for other people who want to hold on to their marriage and they want support, and maybe they need some tactical skills like learning how to communicate better, which is where the marriage and family therapy training comes in. But a lot of it is just, who is out there who's doing this from a Christian perspective? And I can tell you right now, there's no one out there who's doing it from a Christian's perspective, who's speaking specifically to the wife. Can you find a lot of Christian podcasts where it's the couple speaking to you? Absolutely. There's tons. But very few are speaking specifically to the wife. And you said you were binging my show. So, 95% of my episodes speak specifically to the wife. I do have a few, where that could relate to the couple in general, but basically, I mean, what happens, right? Our husbands are like, they just don't show, I'm using air quotes because I realize this is audio only, but they don't show the same level of interest we would like for them to show, right? They're not they're not reading the books. They're not doing all the things. They're not rushing out there to do the marriage retreat. Some are, and God bless you, women who are married to them, but most of them don't listen to my show.
Right.
My show's for everybody else.
That mine's not one of those either.
And it doesn't mean he's bad, right? My husband's a great man. We have a loving, connected, wonderful marriage. He is my best friend. I love him. He's amazing, but he's not that guy. Right. He's just not. We were actually this morning, I got into a little tip because I wanted for my birthday, there was this candle. I live in New York City. So there's this candlelight concert thing where it's like classical instruments like guitar, violins and stuff in candlelight in these beautiful venues. And they play like popular music like Rihanna or Beyonce, but it's all instrumental with the violin. So it's like a really nice date night. And I had sent him one that I really wanted to go to the weekend of my birthday. He never over his head. Didn't even. And then he's like, oh yeah, the thing is up again. Do you want to buy tickets? And I'm like, ugh. But again, doesn't make him a bad guy. It's just, this is how men are, right? It's okay.
That's just how he is. So tell me, you alluded to that. So tell me about your personal journey of going to really kind of a broken marriage. And I hear you saying, unlike a lot of women who, their husband leaves them, you aren't just all dishing it on him. You've had a journey that gave you insight about yourself as a wife. Talk me through that journey of kind of what got you and your marriage back to that place of victory and then led you to serving other women to try to help them rebuild marriage.
Sure. I think for me, it was understanding, because when that sort of thing happens, when you wake up one morning and sure, we had months of fighting and like a really issues in our marriage. But to wake up one morning or come home from, essentially what happened was I came home from a business trip to an empty apartment. Like what happens there, right? What is the feeling like there? So yeah, it's easy. It was easy for me or for anybody to be like, how dare he's wrong, blah, 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 and put all the blame on him. But essentially what happened was that wasn't serving me.
Right.
Wasn't serving me because I wasn't keeping my eyes on my own paper. Right. I wasn't like, if I just sit there and I'm like, oh, he's the bad one. And then just, he's got to change. He's got to do this. He's got to do that. It wasn't helping me to realize, well, where did I have to change? What did I have to contribute in this case? Right. And for a lot of my clients and listeners, sometimes they're in spaces where their husbands are maybe some like mentally or verbally abusive, or maybe there was some infidelity. So they even have more of, he's the bad guy, I've done nothing. But I think and which, since that wasn't my case, maybe it was a little bit easier. So I recognize that it might have been a little bit easier for me than for other people. But I think with every relationship or every breakdown in a marriage, if there's any marriage and there's a breakdown, it's never 100% of one person's fault.
Right.
And what we have to do is take ownership of whatever our percent is. And for some people, it's 1%. For some people, it's 50%. Whatever that looks like, some people it's more. But as long as you can take ownership of and accountability for what you've contributed to the problem, I think that's the first step into moving your marriage forward. So I try to tell my students, like, we try to change our husbands, right? We think we can change them. Like, oh, if they can do this, if they can do that, he's done this wrong, he's done that wrong. But the problem is, he's a full grown man.
Right.
Right? We change babies.
Right.
We don't change adults. If we try to change him, we emasculate him. And what's that doing for you? Like, what is like emasculating him? And that, you may not even mean to, but that's what it's communicating to him. What is that doing to him? It's not helping your cause.
No.
And so if we turn around and then say, okay, I'm going to look at my own paper, which is why one of the things I talk about on my show a lot is boundaries. So if I'm going to, use proper boundaries and look at my own paper, then I'm going to stop trying to change him and going to work on what I have going on for myself. And then you will see the fruit of that. Right. So like, God's word says, my people will be known by their fruit.
Yes.
So if we're to be grace, so we're similar in that you're the grace-fueled leader and I'm the grace-fueled wife, which is part of why I was like, girl, we need to collaborate.
That's right.
Right. But if we're going to be fueled with grace, this is what I tell my wives, like, I want them personally to be so filled with grace, so fueled. That's why I use the word fueled with grace, that like all the ugly things going on in their heart is just overflowing, right? So if you have a cup and maybe there's a coffee cup and there's black coffee in it, if you continue to pour clean water through that cup, eventually all the black will come out and it will be filled with just clean water. And so that's the image that I think of and that I try to pass on, is like, that is the level and amount of grace and love and God's forgiveness and all this other stuff that I want to be filled with, because God's word says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when we're filled with all that grace, all of a sudden that's what comes out. And then you disarm him, right? It's not about manipulating, but you disarm not just your husband, but anybody else around you, right? When there's that saying, like, you get more bees with honey, right? So it's more of like, when that's how you speak, when the flavor of grace colors your words and flavors your words and your actions, that's sweet like honey. All of a sudden, people soften around you. And that's how we change our circumstance. That's how we change the atmosphere around us. That's how we change the temperature in the room, in the home, is that starting there and then letting it overflow.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I love that. That visual is great. Right. And then as you're overflowing with grace, like you said, that is what you're emitting. And that, I often speak to professional women and women in leadership, and speak to that same thing, that we need to be first filled with God's grace so that is what is overflowing, and we can be grace giving as leaders, as wives, as moms, as leaders, as professionals. And that is what will change your circumstances. It's not about changing, like you said, no matter how much we might want to. God can change hearts, but we can't change other people. We have control over what we can do, say, or think ourselves. So I love that. And you mentioned boundaries, and I think that's just a great segue, because on the show, we talk a lot about people pleasing and that approval seeking. And, many of my listeners are very high achievers, and they often get to a place of burnout or feeling almost invisible, either in life, in their marriage, because they've been the yes person and they've given and said yes and struggled to set boundaries to the point that they have nothing left for themselves, their families, their marriage. I hear you speaking to kind of the victory you've had around setting boundaries. And you talk about, I'd like to hear more about the paper. You talk about the paper, about what boundary setting looks like to you, and how do you help that woman who's struggling now to set boundaries without feeling guilty, to do it in a grace-giving, loving way.
How I set boundaries in my marriage and how I do it for the rest of the world without feeling guilty is a little bit different. And
Okay.
I think it was when in my marriage, the first place for me that boundaries became an issue is what I had already talked about, is like understanding, like what's his, keeping what's he got going on over there. That's what you were saying about the paper, keeping my eyes on my own paper.
Right.
And for me, what was it I could change about me?
Mm-hmm.
I think for me in my own marriage, keeping boundaries for myself, I had to keep my faith, as that was a boundary, because that was my relationship with God, was something that I wasn't going to let that get in the way, or let my marriage, let's say, get in the way of that. Because in my story, my husband was an unbeliever, and I had came to the Lord after, and that was one of the reasons why we separated. He was like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want some crazy Christian wife. So that part ended up becoming for me a really important piece, where my relationship with the Lord had to be paramount
Yes.
for everything else, and not to a place where, there's a difference between my relationship with the Lord is everything, but then that also means that now I'm serving in ministry and this and that, and then now I'm saying yes to everything that the church will ask me to do, to the
Yes.
detriment to my family, because
Right.
I've done that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I've done that and seen the some bad effects on my own family because of it, and their walk in their faith, because that caused them to be resentful of things going on at the church. So you don't want to do that. So I think part of it is understanding, why are we people pleasing?
Right.
Anybody, right? Why? What is it that you're looking for? And I, had talked about this. So when we understand that I am a daughter of the God Most High,
Yes. Amen.
I don't need anybody else's validation,
Right.
appreciation, this, that. I may want it and it may feel good when it comes, but I don't need it. And
Right.
then understanding, I think the not feeling guilty part, for myself in my own life, I think of my self-care, because I'm a people pleaser. I will say yes to, I'm the oldest of 9. So
Mm.
my brothers and sisters need something. My mom needs something. My dad needs something. Forget it, my husband needs something. The kids need something. Like, everybody needs something. Everybody's like taking from me, right?
Yes. Yes.
And what happens when that happens, then I don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have time to do things that make me feel good. All of a sudden now I'm feeling down. And I'm sure your listeners have heard this, but this is one of those things that it's like one of my mantras I remind myself of, is that I cannot pour from an empty cup.
Yes.
So if I don't take time, if I don't set that personal time for me, and I don't think of it like self-care as like just getting my nails done, it's more of like, what are the things that I really need that make me really feel connected, that make me feel like I can go out there and conquer the world? And for
Right.
me, one of them is like my morning devotional time or whatever. But if I don't give myself that, because that's a gift,
Mhm.
then I can't give anybody else, because I'm angry, because I'm irritable, because I can't think straight, because my brain is all over the place, because I'm forgetting appointments, because for all the reasons, which is why they say, like, you put your mask on first. It's the
Right.
same idea. And that's the part that's the thought that I think of, like, I won't allow myself to feel guilty, because if I'm not around, if I'm not healthy, if I'm not able to do these things, then what? Because it's happened where I'll run myself so ragged, and I suffer from migraines. All of a
Mm.
sudden I'm out. I have a
Yeah.
migraine and I'm done, and I'm like laying in bed and it's 6 p.m. and I cannot even look at my family.
Right.
And then So what good was all that? What good
Right.
was all that running around? What good was all that stress? When now my husband has to like pick up the slack and to take everything off my plate.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing is also the humility to know that you don't have to do it all.
Right.
And that's so hard
Mm-hmm.
because as people pleasers, we feel like we've got to do it all so many times. But that, where does that come from? Again, I think
Right.
it comes from like a vulnerability, a lack
Right.
of feeling safe and vulnerable because we don't want to rely, at least for me personally, but I know I'm not the only one to whom this applies, where I feel like I can't rely on other people.
Right.
Going back to like my marriage and family therapy, like my marriage therapy background, like, you know, there's things that have gone on in my past that have taught me, whether I realize it or not, that I can't rely on other people. So I'll just do it.
Right.
And I now can't ask for help because what if they don't come through? They're going to let me down.
Right.
And I don't want to open myself up. I don't want to be vulnerable enough to do that, to allow
Right.
somebody to let me down. So then I'll just do it myself.
Yes. Right. So true. Or, you know, they're just patterns of behavior that somehow are a coping mechanism, like you said. Who knows whether it's your family of origin or something in your background where there was some sort of reward or payoff
Mhm,
from either avoiding conflict, like, oh, when I took a chance and spoke up for myself, I wasn't heard and there was
mhm,
backlash. And so it didn't work out for me. So I know it's not worth the risk. It's better to just say yes and take it all in and keep your feelings to yourself than to run the risk of upsetting someone else or not being heard anyway.
mhm, mhm.
Right.
I think for me, even the idea, and I'll say this because it can happen in our families of origin, it can happen in your marriage, it can happen in a lot of different places. So I'll bring it up. But I grew up with a narcissist as in my home, being
Mhm.
somebody who was very close to me. And what I learned is that that person would love me. Their love for me was contingent on what I did for them. What it
Yes.
was like a what have you done for me lately? And so
Yes.
what it taught me very early on was that uh I was only like worthy of love if I was doing things for that person, which
Right.
is a very, very hurtful place for a child to be, or even a grown woman to be, right? For anybody to be, is that I'm only loved if I'm doing something for you. And that is the complete opposite of what God's love is. And what it has
Yes.
caused in me is this difficulty to really wrap my brain around, but how could God possibly love me when I haven't done anything for him? Right,
Yes.
which then goes back to the people pleasing in the church, which then can lead to, you know, churches are notorious for overworking their volunteers because there's
Yes.
so few workers, right? And so
Yes.
once you find the few that say yes and that are good at it, they will all of a
You
sudden
keep
your
asking.
leadership. Yeah, and they'll just keep asking and asking and asking. And it's like, and it's all in the name of the kingdom. And like just
Right.
and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh. And so then there becomes an important place where you need to put boundaries there. But I think for at least me personally, but I think it's important for the listener to understand. That's why I had talked about before, where does the people pleasing come from?
Mm-hmm.
For me it was in my family of origin. For other people it could be all kinds of places, but it was this idea of thinking, because it's not truth, right? And
Right.
I was listening to one of your episodes where you were talking about like what's the thought, right? Because I'm also a certified Christian coach. So I'm like, oh, yep, I get that model, right? So it's like, what's the thought that's creating this action? And then the thought is, if I do this, they'll love me.
Right.
Like that's the incorrect thought.
Right.
What I like to teach my girls is instead, like, let's look at the truth cycle. So if the lie is, if I do this, they will love me. Well, what's the truth behind it?
Right.
Right? Like, what is the true thought that we can replace? Because it's not actually true. Right. And so if we look at then the truth, so what will happen is if we replace this wrong thought with what truth is, what God's truth is, what's the actual truth, then that informs our actions, then it informs our beliefs, our beliefs, and then our actions and our results.
Exactly.
And so that's kind of what I was thinking when it came to that.
Hey friends, I want you to tune in tomorrow as we continue with part 2 of my conversation with Beatriz. I pray this episode blessed you, spoke to you, or encouraged you in some way. If so, please share it with a friend and head on over to Apple Podcasts to leave me a review. That's the only way for me to know if you're enjoying the show. Nothing blesses me more than to hear from you. Also, come on over to our free Facebook community. This is a great place for us to support one another on our faith and leadership journeys. You can find the link to the group in the show notes or go to gracefilledleader.com/community. If you have questions or content ideas for the show, please send me a message on SpeakPipe or via email. Go to gracefilledleader.com/contact and leave a written or voice recorded message. I would love to know how I can best serve you on the podcast. Now to Him who can do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us. Ephesians 3, verse 20. Until next time, my friends, God bless.